Okay, cool. All right, folks, welcome back. And I'm so happy that we are joined this morning by Dr. Rose Brewer. Dr. Rose Brewer has been coming to North Star sessions, I think even before my time at North Star. Yes. Danielle has been inviting Dr. Rose Brewer to a lot of our sessions. So she's integral to North Star. And we also have a conference called Blackonomics and did some of that work too. So just really a huge part of this work. So I'm grateful that she's here with us today. Dr. Rose Brewer is a Morris alumni, distinguished teaching professor, and a past chairperson of the Department of African American and African Studies at the University of Minnesota Twin Cities. She holds affiliate appointments in the Gender, Women, and Sexuality Studies and Sociology. She received her MA and PhD degrees in sociology from Indiana University and a postdoctoral studies at the University of Chicago. A social activist and scholar, Brewer publishes extensively on Black feminism, political economy, social movements, race, class, gender, and social change. She is one of the authors of an award-winning book, The Color of Wealth, a number of co-edited volumes, including the U.S. Social Forum, Perspectives of a Movement, Bridges of Power, Women's Multicultural Alliances, and its academic feminism's dead. Is academic feminism's dead? Theory and practice. Most recently, she co-edited Rod Bush, Lessons from a Radical Black Scholar on Liberation, Love, and Justice. Her work includes more than 80 essays, articles, and referred publications. Dr. Brewer has been incredibly involved in a lot of community events. She is an incredible scholar, activist. She leads incredible work in the Twin Cities and beyond. We're so happy to have her come back again for the North Star Black Cooperative Fellowship. I'm going to hand over the session to her, and she's going to lead us through what rethinking capitalism is and solidarity economies. So thank you for joining us again, Dr. Rose Brewer.
Thank you so much. It's always good to be here. It's a end of the year expectation now. I was wondering, am I going to be at Nexus or what's going to happen? But I'm, just so pleased to share some knowledge with you all today and to get your ideas and your knowledge, because all of you are doing incredible work. I want to just briefly go through the agenda for today and maybe do a brief go round. If people want to start putting their names and pronouns, I forgot to put my pronoun on my name in the chat, but we can start there and see who's in the space with us. But let me just share briefly what we're headed for today. And let me see if I can get a screen share going. Okay. All right, let's move this over. Make that print a little bit bigger. Oops, not that one. This one. Is that visible? Can people see that? Okay, great. So, check-ins, name, pronoun, put that in the chat. Thank you for that lovely introduction. And let's just walk through the agenda briefly. I've been talking about and researching capitalism for a long time. And actually, this period is the most, I would say, generative for understanding it, for it being out there in the universe, in our communities. People are talking about capitalism, the solidarity economy, cooperative economics. I don't know if there's ever been a time where that has been so embraced. That is the criticism of this economy that we're in. and how deeply it's connected to racism and exclusion, but also really thinking through, so what's to be done? What are the alternatives? And even before we can imagine all that can be done, the work that you're doing, the work that a number of thinkers and visionaries are doing, plotting out that way forward. Whether or not it's always going to work, it is important to put it out there, to begin doing the work, to imagine the world that we want to see happen, but being very clear-eyed from my perspective about what we're up against in a society that is so resistant to alternatives. Actually, just as a brief aside, I didn't even know that I would watch this clip this morning, but as I was putting my clips in, I saw that Angela Davis had spoken or planned to speak in Upper New York yesterday. And this just tells you the situation we're in this country. Some young high schoolers invited her to speak and talk about her work. Well, before anything could happen, the school board they canceled the talk and said that Miss Davis was too radical for the young people. Now, these are young people who decided that this is the speaker they want. So you're talking about censorship, and as it turns out, this upper state New York area is the place where Toni Morrison was born. I've forgotten the exact name of it. So, make a long story short, the students would not accept no. They brought in the NAACP. The NAACP found a Black church that said, yes, we'll sponsor it, even if the school board won't allow it, even if a college here in this area won't allow it. And it just was a nice, to me, signal about how important it is not to give up and to continue to push back in this very, very reactionary period that we're in. And so the event went on. The students got tremendous encouragement and are going to continue to fight. They had already not been exposed to Toni Morrison's work because a lot of her books are excluded. Some of you might know this because of the book banning that's going on. So it opened up a space. But my point is, this particular conversation is an important one, and want to share some of what we know about capitalism and the kind of future that we want to achieve, whether that be a cooperative economy, a solidarity economy, or socialism. And we'll talk a little bit about that as an alternative. So, very quickly, in terms of check-ins, I can't see the chat, but if people want to quickly go around and introduce themselves, just name, pronouns, and your organization. So, the floor is open.
Good morning, Dr. Brewer. My name is Lane, and I'm sitting here with Jai Jimmy. We are both using they, them pronouns, and we're with a farm called Home.
Thank you.
Salam and good morning, Dr. Brewer. My name is Tennille. I'm actually calling in today from Las Vegas, Nevada, but my cooperator and I, I'm sorry, I use she, her pronouns. My cooperator and I steward 20 acres of land in Central Georgia.
Beautiful, beautiful.
Good morning, Dr. Brewer. It is Yancy here representing Voice of Culture and House of Culture. We do Black American and West African singing, dancing, drumming, telling stories. We're an oral griot organization. We've been doing stuff in the Twin Cities for a while, and I use they, them pronouns. Good morning.
Good morning. Are there a couple more fellows, organizations?
Good morning. My name is Sophia. I use she, her pronouns. I'm here with my sister Olivia, also using she, her pronouns, and we are both from the Lupine Collective.
Excellent.
Peace, Dr. Rose Brewer. My name's Jahan Thomas. My pronouns are she and her. I am coming in from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and my collective's called the Boston Black Market and Enrichment Center.
Thank you for that.
Greetings, Dr. Brewer. My name is Sarita. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm also a member of the Lupine Collective.
Very good, very good.
Good morning.
morning.
Oh,
Go ahead.
my name is Mo. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm here in Minneapolis as a part of a farm called Home.
All right, excellent.
Good morning. My name is Charlie Mariamu, and I am also, I use she and they pronouns, and I'm also with a farm called Home.
Thank you.
And hi, Dr. Brewer. I'm Cal Adegwe. I'm also here with the Farm Called Home in Minneapolis.
I want to hear more about, there's a big crew here. Thank you for being here. Did we get all of the organizations?
I just saw Mujahid unmute, so.
My name's Mujahid, he, him, Cultural Crops Cooperative.
Thank you. And are there Nexus folk who want to say a word or two in the space with us?
Sure. Hi, this is Liana Brown. I use she, her. I work with Nikuli at Nexus.
Excellent.
Nikuli, she, her, and I work with Liana at Nexus.
All right. Just really grateful that all of y'all are on the call this morning. I thought we'd start with just a brief question. What is capitalism and racial capitalism? And I guess I would extend that further to why is that important? I know that for some people, the whole issue of the kind of economy that we're working in, that we are dependent on, may not be as pressing an issue as just day-to-day survival. But I just want to assert that day-to-day survival, if you as a family, as a community, as a people, are so caught up in the need to survive, then that really raises the question, what kind of system are we under that presses that survival issue? Why don't people have adequate housing, food, access to education, to the kind of resources they need for their children, for their family? And a big piece of that is, in fact, the way this society has organized the economy. And one of the things that we're going to really delve into a little bit more deeply, and of course, a number of us know this, that this economy cannot be understood without also understanding its connection to race and racism, to white supremacy. And the people who have begun to talk about racial capitalism brought that into really sharp awareness. So we're going to open with that, and we're going to spend the first hour, I guess it's less than an hour now, really kind of digging into the meaning of that term, the idea of racial capitalism as being related, some of the impact on our community. And then we're going to move into a little bit of what I would call a deeper dive. How do we get here? You know, what is this history? What can we make of it, and what can we do about it? We'll break for lunch at 12 for half an hour, and then everyone should be back after that at 12:30. We'll get into a deeper discussion of, well, what are we confronting today? And my scroller won't allow me to scroll, so let me see if I can do this way. Okay, move it please, so people can see. Let me see if I can get the scroller going. There it is. So we'll return and look at the system today. I know a number of you are involved in building alternatives to the system. What do you face when you confront the rules, the regulations, the laws. I know many of you have come up against those rules, regulations, and laws. For those of you who are familiar with Cooperation Jackson and Jackson, Mississippi, you probably know that their water system is no good. And part of that has to do with the state of Mississippi refusing to replace the pipes. It's an expensive proposition, but they rather poison the families, the population, the children there. And of course, that has a lot to do with the ugly history of race in Mississippi. But Cooperation Jackson is doing a lot of the work that I know some of you are doing. They purchased land at the height of the water crises. They distributed water to the community. There are 150,000 Black people in Jackson, Mississippi. 80% of the population is Black. So you can imagine what an impact that has had. But it hasn't been easy. They've gone on to, I don't know if any of you have actually visited Cooperation Jackson, but they have a multiple group of activities around cooperation, including a composting entity, a cafe. I believe they have a sewing co-op. So they're building, on a terrain that says, we know we're up against this horrific system, but we're going to circumvent it. So we'll talk about that and really get into an issue. I didn't hear housing this time around. I know in some of the past efforts, housing has been talked about, but one of the big issues around survival and trying to survive is having a roof over one's head. And we'll look briefly at some of the policies that have mitigated against that. And I have a short, I think 6-minute clip on how the public policy in this country, forget about Jackson, Mississippi, but just the US in general, and I know you all know this, develop policies that continue into the current period, that are a part of what goes on right here in the Twin Cities, in Minneapolis, St. Paul, and beyond. I know I heard people from other parts of the country, and the struggle against having adequate affordable housing is a real issue. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And then, so thinking about the alternatives, what's to be done. And I have 3 areas that we'll break up into smaller groups to discuss. The cooperative economy, Black cooperatives, the solidarity economy, and what I call a just transition to socialism. And then we'll close out with the revolutionary poet June Jordan. If you don't know the incredible June Jordan, who's transitioned now with the ancestors, but one of my favorite poems in the world, which really asserts our resistance, is a poem about my rights. So we'll end with that. So that's the agenda. I will stop share, and we can begin the conversation about what is capitalism. Well, in a nutshell, it's definitely a system that's built on exploitation. It's a profit-driven system that basically it diverts into 2 categories of owners and workers. And that means we live under an economy where the factories, the tools, the even incredibly more so today, the technology is in the hands of an owning class. Most of us, the majority of us, live from paycheck to paycheck. I mean, we have to sell our labor. I mean, that's the nature of this economy. If you don't work, typically you don't have the resources. And obviously, we live in a society where even having a job doesn't guarantee that you have sufficient pay, that you have sufficient wages to live comfortably, and not even comfortably, to live so that you can keep a roof over your head. So it's that kind of aggressive system. It took some time for it to be developed, and it continues to, I would say, morph. And it's not only in the context of the US that it's able to survive. Capitalism as a global system. You could say it's always been a global system, especially when we talk about the way that that settler colonialism here and outside of the society, the enslavement of African peoples, taking it into the continent. But it certainly is a particular kind of global system today. And for those of you who are concerned with environmental justice, as we all should be, the extractivism that still fuels this system is a major part of global capitalism today. So we can define it, capitalism generally, as a system of private ownership of the resources that should belong to all of the world's people, that should belong and should nurture Mother Earth, but it doesn't allow for that. It's also a system built on private property and private ownership. And for those of you who are building collectively, that's absolutely counter to the logic, or what I call illogic, of the system. And the laws, the policy works to support that, whether it be policies around property rights, whether it be policy around marriage, whether it be, because marriage is a property system in a lot of ways. So in a nutshell, and we can come back to that, but that's capitalism writ large. The other piece of this is more and more information, investigation, research on racial capitalism. Now you might ask, so what's the difference between capitalism and racial capitalism? Well, not much. All capitalism, in fact, is a racial capitalism. Let me say a little bit about that. It's taken, I would say, Black scholars over the last decades or so to begin scrutinizing the way radical white scholars have talked about capitalism. My definition that I just gave you is pretty much in accord with the way I would say economists of capitalism, the ones who are radical, have defined it, that some people are exploited, others own, and are the exploiters. But oftentimes these radical theorists do not, in fact, take in consideration the racialized nature of the capitalist system. And so these thinkers and writers, going back, and I'll name a few of them, scholars such as Cedric Robinson, scholars such as Stuart Hall, and then today, Robin D.G. Kelley. Some of you probably know of Robin Kelley's work, but they're all saying, yes, capitalism is that. It's the exploitation of a working class. It's the ownership of the resources that should belong to the people. It is a system set up for profit and not for human value. And that's all true, but it wouldn't exist in its current formation or its historical formation without its racialized nature. And that's the way you get the conceptualization that all capitalism is racialized. Let me say a little bit more about that, and we'll return to it, and then I'll stop and we can do some sharing. It's my understanding that the first idea of racialized capitalism as a concept, as a terminology, actually happened in South Africa. I shared with Nkuli an article that I'm hopeful can be circulated to all of you, which is a much more elaborate discussion of the meaning of racial capitalism. But the author of that article gets into its legacy and to how it first began to be utilized. And the way it initially came into consciousness was actually in South Africa. This was during the apartheid struggle. And what they were trying to figure out is, in that divided white supremacist apartheid system, how was it that capitalism was existing? There was a white working class that was well taken care of, but under apartheid, Black workers were excluded from being a part of the urban areas of South Africa. There were the Bantustans where people had to come in from the outside lands into the areas where they were doing all of the ugly work, whether it be mining or gold or keeping someone else's house. And so how could those two systems exist if under the traditional notion of capitalism, it was all about the exploitation of a united working class? And what they found in their analysis of South Africa was you could definitely have a highly racially exploitative system along the side of an exploitative system that was built on the exploitation of white wage labor. So both of those things converged in a way that they coined, the academics and the thinkers and the activists who were trying to figure out South Africa, coined this term racial capitalism. So it wasn't just about the exploitation of the working class. It was about how race was used to intensify the level of profit by excluding broad categories of humanity, in this case, the African peoples of South Africa, from even participating in the working class for a living wage. So they were getting profit, even more intense profit, out of the super exploitation of this group of these peoples, and use the racial notions, the ugly racial notions of why this exploitation was justified. And the white working class, of course, benefited to some extent. They could have benefited more if they would have seen that their interests aligned with the African people, but they were so racially caught up in the idea that somehow they deserve more. It would take the political struggle of the Black Africans to really overturn this system. So I'm going to stop there. I don't want to, linger too long, and see how this is landing with people. Does this coincide with your understanding of capitalism, and putting a finer point on it by saying that we're really dealing with racial capitalism? So anybody want to take a stab at a question or a comment? Coincide with your understanding? And I can see the chat if you prefer to put your comment or your question in the chat.
I would just jump in to say, yes, absolutely, it coincides with my understanding. Race seems to be at the heart of everything in the United States specifically. I haven't lived anywhere else, so I can't speak to any context, but it seems to me that you can't find a system in the United States that doesn't have racism and race built into it. With us indigenous folks at the bottom.
Right. Absolutely. So having said that, do we still need to, people still, sometimes they use capitalism, more and more racial capitalism, to really lift up your point that everything in this country is racialized, and why wouldn't the economy that drives so much have that at its center, which it does. And do we just use racial capitalism? I think where people are at this point who are thinking through this, I mentioned Robin D.G. Kelley, the late Cedric Robinson, who some of you may be familiar with his work on the Black radical tradition, who talked about some of the principles And I'll say a little bit more about how he defined racial capitalism, going all the way back to the 15th century, which is when the system really got off the ground in its more substantial expression. I see a lot of comments in the chat. Capitalism is a pyramid scheme. Lane, tell us more about that. I think that's Lane, right? Capitalism pyramid. What do we need to know?
Oh, that's funny. I mean, I think of capitalism as a pyramid scheme because of its shape. There's more of us who are not making as much or are not as equipped to survive.
Right.
And as you find people with more wealth, you know, it gets smaller and smaller and smaller, and it's shaped like a pyramid. And frankly, they tell you like, well, pull yourself up. You can get there. You know, you can, all you got to do is, but what they don't tell you,
work hard, right?
Yeah, work hard and all of that.
Okay, there's other, I mean, and definitely, you know, if you look at the ugly history over the past period, we're talking about what happened in 2008 when the banks, if there was ever an example of a pyramid scheme, they had no resources, but they stole people's wealth, and the government bailed them out eventually. And the government isn't supposedly technically able to bail out a capitalist economy, but they do it all the time. So, you know, talking out of both sides of your mouth. There are other things. Interesting. Capitalism has an exoskeleton. That's from Jahan. Tell us a little bit about that.
Peace, Doctor. Well, basically, you know, just thinking about what you had said, that capitalism, you know, keeps forming and shaping and hopping waters and hopping bodies of water, hopping these different land masses, and then having the commonality that the racialization of, well, just the development of racialization and associating, you know, Blackness with a hierarchy of whiteness. I've said that capitalism is like an exoskeleton because similar to roaches, who, you know, similar to, you know, organisms that have exoskeletons, they can like survive a nuclear bombing. So in a way, capitalism strives to survive and morph into a lot of different ways. So that's what just made me think about it.
Yeah, that's a good analogy. We're going to talk about it. It has morphed from its inception to the current. Usually it's talked about as a global capitalist form, but it's always been global. But it's also around the time of, I guess it was Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher in Great Britain, this whole idea of neoliberalism, that capitalism operates in a neoliberal way, emerged. And we can say a little bit more about that. For a quick moment, right after World War II into the early 70s, there was some, you know, talk about there should be subsidies and support for the population, but that didn't last too long. The movement toward intense privatization, where resources, if you are going to get any, don't turn to the government for those. And the privatization of schools, the privatization of hospitals, the privatization of healthcare, and you know, even moving toward the privatization of all of our resources. This is its latest expression, and it's gone beyond that into financialization. So we'll get a little bit in that. There's a good question, and that's a good shift. What happened in the 15th century that caused capitalism to grow? Let's talk about that. That's a good segue into another document that I want to share. I'm going to do a screen share with y'all quickly. And let's see, where is that document? Okay. Here it is. All right. Is this a term anyone has heard about? Dum diversas? It's one of the papal bulls going back to the 15th century, that question that was asked. This tells you that in order for capitalism to emerge during that period, it needed the support of the church. It needed the support of what we would call today venture capitalists, who would invest in folk like, for example, Columbus, looking for the so-called India, and ended up in this hemisphere. That's the reason Native Americans were called and are called Indians in some instances. But for the system to take off, there were multiple arenas, and the role of the church is central to this. Let me just, if I can scroll a bit here. I'm just having trouble with my scroller. Anyway, you should be able to see some of that. But Pope Nicholas V issued the papal bull Dum Diversas on June 18th, 1452. And it authorized Alfonso V of Portugal. And you know that the leading Europeans who would be central in catalyzing the capitalist system, first Spain and Portugal, and then the others, including Britain and France, and the list just goes on. The Dutch, but this papal bull, first of all, it named what they call Saracens, the Muslims, which was a terminology applied, and pagans. You see how those are put side by side, and any other unbelievers, to perpetual slavery. This was the element, the underpinning of what would justify the forced removal of African peoples, but also the othering of people who practice Islam, as well as indigenous folk. And this meant that as the impetus to find new sources of wealth extended and expanded, as I said, the role of the church was underneath that. And central to that, and to the emergence of capitalism, was the need of the resources from spaces and places that we know today as the Caribbean. So not only did Columbus bypass India, Columbus would falsely name this area of the world America. And under those circumstances, the growth of the plantation would emerge. Another piece of this is that these lands were supposed to be empty, and of course they weren't. There were already indigenous folk there. And then the forcible removal of Africans from the continent, first as an exchange, but then in terms of enslavement. The point being that that was essential. The colonization, the enslavement of Africans, and the production of resources on these lands that were supposedly empty, absolutely essential to the emergence of capitalism. It wasn't only, pushing white Europeans off their land in Europe and into factories. The factory system alone wouldn't have done it. you needed the expropriation, exploitation of the lands belonging not to the Europeans and the bodies and the labor belonging to Africans to catalyze this system. You needed both of those things at the same time. And this is one of the major contributions of the idea of racial capitalism. These human beings were racialized in a way that this particular papal bull begins as pagans, as unbelievers, required to live in perpetual slavery. So they had an explanation and they had a rationale. And on this particular pillar would be built the idea of inferior and superior races. The Christianization, the movement from religion to race would be I would say the nail in the coffin for the old system and the beginning of the new system. So my point is you had the church, you had a shifting and growing group of bourgeoisie within Europe who were moving away from feudalism into a system built on profit. And you needed all those systems to come together. And the typical explanations have left out, even Marx leaves out the role that enslavement, colonialism, and the forced removal of indigenous people, the genocide of them on their land to explain this system. And that's probably the major initial shift. And then once you get this system going, you're talking about 300 years of forced enslavement. And without that kind of unpaid labor, we wouldn't be living in the kind of capitalist system that emerged from it. It would morph over time, but foundational to it. I hope that answered your question. I'll make sure that y'all get a copy of this Dum Diversus, which is a papal bull that gave legitimacy and credibility to the exploitation. Yeah, I'll make sure that Nkuli gets it. It's very, very important to understanding the foundational principles. I thought we'd spend just a little bit of time in breakup. The question that I'd like for y'all to talk about with one another, although some of it's been surfaced already, it has to do with, given this brief overview and given the knowledge that many of you brought to this in the chat, thinking about the impact of capitalism on our communities, identify one impact that capitalism has had or does have on our community, and talk about that just concretely. You can think about it in the context of the work you're doing, but this is not just a historical reality. This through line shapes us and makes it very difficult to live as full human beings because of racialized capitalism. So I think we have about 15 minutes in the section. Why don't we spend about 8 minutes in the small groups talking to one another, and then the remaining few minutes sharing a key idea around the impact of the system on our community. And I will break you all up. Let me see where the breakout rooms look like. Okay, already broken up. I'm gonna open all rooms and y'all got the question, right? The impact on our communities, your specific community or our community in general. So there you go. Let's see. We're gonna put sign 2, 3. Okay. Copy. And then assign to. Okay, did you want to go into one of those rooms?
Yeah.
Okay, let me put you, I'll put you in 2.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Okay. Can you see the breakout rooms?
Yes, I can.
Why don't you just join one? Because
Okay.
I'm not having success putting you in one.
Okay.
Maybe 2 or 3. Looks like there are fewer people there. Maybe 2.
I'll turn 2 then.
Okay. I know that was a really short period of time to begin the discussion, but we just wanted to get a quick sense of what people were thinking about impact. And we have a nice group of folk who perhaps can do a little bit of sharing. One major impact that your group identified, and we can start with room one. Who was in room one?
I was in room one with Tennille and Sarita and Leanna.
Okay.
Sorry. And the major theme that came up for us was that capitalism is a separator, it's a divider. It separates us from our culture, from control of our health, from our communities, in a way that we're not able to fully grasp the sense of ourselves in terms of like, oh, this is a need that I have and now I'm going to meet that need. Like there's that separation of like being able to do that in a myriad of ways. We talked about maternal health, specifically in the Black communities. We talked about culturally how that separates the Muslim community from being able to participate fully in society, and the way our lineages have been broken and been separated from our ancestry. So yeah, it's a divide.
Y'all had a rich discussion for 7 minutes. And I guess you answered the question, why? I mean, why would a system like that be developed? I mean, not that we don't know the answer to that, but so these are the consequences and the why of that.
The why of that is because it forces us to attend to capitalism's needs before our own. And so that serves towards furthering capitalism and the entanglement it has in all aspects of our lives.
Yeah, I mean, if people were in unity around there's something wrong here and push back against it, but the separation allows us to, shall we say, drink the poison around this is the best system there is. Everybody's on their own boat. If you work hard enough, I know some of these things, but asking the question in whose interest that is and asking, you know, what other way could we think about our relationship to one another as communal people, etc. So you got into that, but you know, sometimes, well, you know, the question of, well, why would that even make sense? But it also, you know, rids people of a basic humanity, which you got into. Group two, group one got us off the ground. What was some of the key ideas that came up in your group? And I'm not looking at the breakout room. That would include Mo and Yancy, Kina. I hope I didn't mispronounce anybody's name.
I mean, I can jump in and say, from what I recall, we were kind of talking about how just in the action of like going to the grocery store brings up these feelings of interacting with racial capitalism. And I remember Kenna was talking about just going deeper into the idea of this food desert. Like when we say food desert, it implies that it's naturally occurring and existing and that it's just there versus referring to a food desert as food apartheid, which brings context to it and speaks to the history of intentionality and systems setting up to create this reality. So I think that that was important, like just in the way that we use our language can also lend or not lend itself to like certain ideas. I think if that makes sense, if anybody else from the group wants to jump in too.
That made perfect sense. And y'all might know that forever and ever, the term food desert was used, even in our community. Sometimes it crops up again, but if you can make clear that we're talking about, and back to the language piece, language has meaning within it. If we can talk about, we're not talking about a food desert, something that just emerged naturally, but this is intentional, as you were saying, that there's food. This is an intentional practice of food apartheid, and it gives it the power. And part of what we're doing, you know, this is a part of our teaching and learning together. But for our communities to take the veil off of some of these concepts, I know y'all do this probably on a day-to-day basis, but it's important because back to the powers that be who have the ability to shape the language. So that means it shapes the consciousness. We're trying to shift consciousness, right? We're trying to get folk to dig deep and our community to understand that there is a great deal of intentionality, if not complete intentionality, to all of this. And the media certainly doesn't help, does it? So anybody else from 2 wanna chime in, or we can go to room 3? All right.
That was pretty much it.
Okay, no, that was
I
well,
feel like.
well said, well said. Jahan, we've already heard from Jahan Lane. Anybody else who hasn't spoken? Have we heard from, is it, I'm not sure about these rooms. Charlie, Sarita, have y'all spoken? Okay, Mo, Yancy, we heard from that group. I thought we started with Lane, but anyway, Jahan, Lane, and Mujahid. I know I'm butchering the names. Cal, what did you all come up with?
Hi, so I was in group 3, and one thing that stuck with me was Lane's comment about thinking about the soil as a natural finite resource that capitalism steals from us through monoculture crops and just, you know, centuries of extracting minerals from the soil, and how that should be a resource that is here to support all living things on this planet. And it's really been degraded to the point where it affects all living things on this planet, down from like microorganisms to humans, the ways that we're able to connect, the ways that we're able to have space to gather with each other. Yeah.
Powerfully stated, absolutely. Think about the question about, you know, how did capitalism get off the ground? At its inception, the ideology, the propaganda around it meant that everything was under the domain of those owners. They could do whatever they want to with the earth, the land, human beings, the sky, the whole nine, in terms of giving permission to exploit. I mean, that's embedded in this mentality. It began with a certain set of assumptions about who was entitled. If you were gendered male and white, that by definition in the earliest period, Christian gave authority. We fast forward to this country, and by 1790, the Naturalization Act of 1790 allowed only white male property owners to be naturalized citizens of this country. Some of you might remember that from your history. So there's a through line, a thread.
Excuse me, sorry to interrupt.
Mhm.
I wanted to know, somebody was talking earlier about capitalism is divide. What were
Divisive,
okay?
yeah, they said it was divisive, right?
Who said that? Sorry, I
All
just
right.
wanted to.
Who made that? That was Charlie, right?
Yeah, I said that.
Charlie.
Charlie Mariamu. Hi, Kenna.
Charlie. Oh,
C-H-A-R-L-Y.
I'm sorry, I'm like on my phone, so I can't see well.
I know,
but,
I know. And who are you?
Charlie, this is Kenna. I just was
Okay.
okay. So what Charlie was okay. Well, y'all were just what Charlie said about capitalism being like divisionary. And then what Dr. Brewer was just saying about ownership made me think about how like capitalism divides the owner from the steward. Or like it's just because you own something, it's not necessarily that you're taking care of it. And also like just divides from the idea that because I'm taking care of something, then I get to have a say over like what goes on with it.
Yeah, that's the way it's supposed to work. But your first point around, we're talking about an economy, an economy, and it's not only the economy, but it's the politics around that, which y'all have gotten into, that sustains permission for only a narrow group. Back to that pyramid idea. Once upon a time, Occupy Wall Street talked about the 99%. You could think about it's the 1% if you look at it as a pyramid, and then at that base, all the humanities that is pretty much excluded from decision making, even though theoretically, once a couple of years you go to vote, and the power of that vote to shift any of the laws, regulations, dynamics of this system, it certainly doesn't impact the corporate structure in a way that would shift the stewardship to us, to all of humanity, to the people in this country. Just doesn't work that way. So you're absolutely right. That division, not accidental. And I think the point was made earlier. If that kind of sharing would happen, we wouldn't have a capitalist system. We'd have something else. So yeah, thank you for that. I think we've looked at some of these stages. I'll make sure that people get the dumb versus document. You'll get the racial capitalism document and get the links to some of this other material around the video links, which are short but important links that folks should have in terms of making sense out of this. You all probably know pretty much the story. We talked about how the system was set into to place. Some people say that Europe was in a particular space and place and time that shifted the dynamics of the world from the old order to a newer order. And let's think about that. What's going on? We won't get into the specifics of the wars involving Christianity and Islam, but that's a precursor dynamic that's happening, and you can see some of that reference in the article that we just looked at, the Dom Diversis article. But what else is going on? And one of the reasons I like this idea that Cedric Robinson put on the table, he makes it very clear to us that we don't know where Africa would have been, or some of the other areas of the world that were ultimately colonized by Europe, because the distortion of that process was interrupted by emergent capitalism and by enslavement and white settlerism. There's just an interruption there, if you think about it that way. We can visualize the interruption on the continent, but it wasn't only Africa. It was what would become other parts of the world, like China, like India. All of these are areas that were ultimately colonized, and their people exploited in a very particular way. And in this hemisphere, the emergence of what would become the United States comes out of what was happening in Europe. A group of well-off, deemed important elites came to this part of the world, indicating that there was something to be garnered financially from developing this part of the world. England, Great Britain was also very much embedded in colonizing what would become the United States because of the resources, the potential resources, the fact that this is supposedly empty land when it wasn't. Indigenous people occupied the whole of the space of this area. But that didn't matter. If you have the military might to do this, and it wasn't as if these other societies didn't fight, didn't resist, but this is also, you probably have heard the term conquest. This is also a story of conquest, of people resisting and fighting, of being conquered. And we have to keep that in mind when we try to understand how did we get here. This 500-600 year legacy is a part of that. And so the foundational principles are put into place. The land is seized. You could call it land theft. Human bodies are seized through a middle passage and forced to work the land. The continent, we'll just think about Africa, is exhumed of some of its most productive peoples. And that would have a consequence for colonialism on the continent. So these are intertwined systems, and it would take, I would say, the insights as well as the, I would call it political will of every human being that was caught up in this logic to try to undermine it. And let's be very clear that there was never a time when human beings who were caught up in the illogic of what would become capitalism did resist it. And we continue to question and resist into the current period. The system, however, has not been overturned. And back to the point about the way it evolves and morphs and shifts and turns, a lot of that is made possible because of the laws, the regulations, where does power lie? How can we have a power shift? But let's just think about the unfolding. So we have the initial period. It's not completely a capitalized system yet, but it is moving in that direction. And y'all have heard this many, many times. Without African bodies, and we'll fast forward to the US, without the bodies of enslaved Africans here, and not only bodies were worth, the buying and selling of Africans as a body, Black bodies, but also the resources and the crops that were produced. And the most significant crops were sugar, tobacco, and ultimately cotton. Even before the colonization of what became known as the United States, the plantation system was being developed in areas like Brazil. Some of you may know that the largest number of Africans from the continent that were enslaved actually were deposited in Brazil. And Brazil still has the largest number of African people outside of the continent on its shores. A lot of people don't know that. Haiti would become another significant area. Cuba, another. We don't necessarily think of Cuba as playing an outside source in the development of capitalism, but it did. And Cuba is a quite African country, now a socialist country, but its inception. So all of the Caribbean, known as the West Indies, all of that area, including Central and South America. When you think about the exploitation that was necessary, think about it in that way. You take this hemisphere, you expropriate the resources. These are sold for profits, and it's on this basis that the system is built. That led the way to something called industrial capitalism. So we moved from a plantation type system, ultimately in this country overthrown by the Civil War, and you can question whether or not it was really overthrown, because you look at the, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, and emancipation didn't include incarcerated folk, and y'all know this. But there are always laws. Keep in mind, it's the political economy, it's the economy, but it's also the system of government and state that lifts us up. And that's going to be a continuing theme to keep in mind. So we do have to fight racial capitalism, but racial capitalism is embedded in a political system that supports it, that creates laws and regulations, whether at the state or local or other level. We don't think about Minneapolis as being a capitalist city. Minneapolis is a capitalist city. You look at all of the foundations, and you look at, we know that they put some resources in our efforts, but their money making and the resources that they get from major corporations like 3M, like the others that dominate the Minnesota landscape. Don't forget that this isn't out of the kindness of it's not out of the largesse, just to understand that the system runs through. Anyway, this plantation system built the basis for what would become industrial capitalism. And this is where machinery, where the working classes would build cars, products, etc. And we know that African people, the ex-enslaved, if you want to use that word, were at the bottom of that system. Although I do want to say that in the so-called post-slave period, cities like Birmingham, Alabama, which became industrial cities, wouldn't have been possible without the labor of Africans who were often on chain gangs. And I know some of you have probably seen the film 13th, that slavery literally didn't end except in name only. And it would take almost slavery, if you want to put it in those terms, to build some of these southern cities. In the North, it was the white working class that were at the point of production. But ultimately, the whole system depended on areas like Birmingham and other parts of the South. The whole country had gotten rich off of cotton. There wouldn't have been banks, there wouldn't have been insurance companies, there wouldn't have been, so you just can't say it's the South. It's the whole system that was predicated on this illogic, I would call it that. So we moved from a plantation system to industrial system. And if we get into the current period, I mentioned this already, the increasing globalization and financialization of the system. Let's talk a little bit about that. The old industrial system is dying off. Does that have any meaning for people? You can make a car any place in the world, right? You don't
Yeah, it's changing from that factory work to more heavy on the extraction of resources from the earth. And like I was just talking about this the other day, but like the war in Ukraine was not just some random thing that happened. It's Russia and China realizing, okay, the new frontier is minerals and gold, and having that land that has that deep in its soil, having control of that. And then if we can control that, then we can control the future, because the future is technology.
Right. Absolutely correct. Don't need the industrial sector anymore. And if you go to cities like Detroit, I don't know, some of you may have spent time in Detroit. I've spent quite a bit of time in Detroit. And it's interesting that a lot of where Detroit resistance is happening is pushing back against that food apartheid, as you all know, that they're doing a lot of that that work there. And that happened before the downturn with Chrysler and Ford and those other car making companies. Actually, I have some folk that I work with politically who worked in those factories, and what they say now is most of whatever bringing together that needs to be done is done through robotics. So they have mechanized tools to do that. You don't need human labor anymore. So where do people go if that's been their livelihood for a very long time? Well, extractivism, typically external to this country, back to your point, because that's where the minerals are that we need for these iPhones that we love so much, and for AI, and for driverless cars and everything else that's mechanized. But here it's low paid service work. You know, it's increasingly, it's work that's needed, but very little to live on. So teachers are underpaid, childcare workers are underpaid, care for the elderly, that's where the jobs are. Fast food, y'all know this, but you can't get a living wage. So the bifurcation, and a lot of that work is done by people of color, by disproportionately Black folk. You can't support a family or even an individual on that. So back to your point around this technological revolution that's happening, controlled by, technology is not bad, but who controls it? And as we've said before, the way capitalism has evolved, capitalists have a leg up. And so they're in a position of control. And a lot of this is financialized also. One of the things that I wanted us to think about is if you can't, really support self and family, one of the snares is that the lure of debt has, especially for people who are in the working classes, and I would say more toward the middle, that credit card, which increasingly has 15, 20, 29% interest, snares people. So the capitalists aren't paying living wages, but are being seductive around credit debt. And that's a snare that is very difficult to get out of. That's the financialization of the system. That's how the banks, that's how the credit companies are making money. So we move from industrialization to mechanization to AI to financialization to the nature of this global system. Stop there, see if there are other comments or questions about how it has evolved. One of the downsides, and this really relates to the work that you all are doing, we said earlier that the ideology was you being the elites. It's in your power to control everything. But where has that gotten Mother Earth? There's a tipping point to this system. You can't use everything up. We're now in the middle of disaster, climate disaster, frankly speaking. The capitalists seemingly don't care. I was talking to some people who were at the COP27 in Egypt, and they were telling me that there were over 1,000 corporations who were greenwashing what it would take to keep temperature at 1.5 centigrade. At the rate going, it's not going to happen. So there's a built-in bomb within the system. If you don't shift to a communal relationship with Mother Earth, if we don't share the resources, if it's simply aggrandizement to use up every resources, all the resources from the Amazon to the minerals on the continent to whatever. Is that the reason the eye is on Mars and other areas in the hemisphere and beyond the hemisphere in the universe? But there is a contradiction built in. You can try to grow forever, which has been, the underpinning of capitalism. You can aggrandize forever, but we're at a moment when it's going to take us as a people to say, this isn't a system that can work and has not worked for most of humanity for 500 or 600 years. Obviously, a few people have gotten rich and they're going to, lift up a few people of color who are billionaires. But the majority of the people, the system does not work in that way for us. And it has its limitations. Its tipping point has probably already been reached. That doesn't mean it has thrown in the towel. I mean, we can see that. The so-called resolution is carbon capture, finding ways to bury the carbon dioxide. These are the things that they're thinking about, which doesn't resolve the issue of how we relate to one another as human beings and how we live in solidarity with one another and the kind of communal relationships that we want to have. So at any rate, let me stop there in a few minutes and see if we're pretty sure about the way the system has unfolded and what we're dealing with now. Questions, comments, and I'm not looking at the chat, but I can look at the chat. Anybody want to make a statement about this? Let's see where we are with the chat. Okay, I see some links. So absolutely, Lane. Capitalism loves to grab a token and say, look, they did it, you can too. Bootstrap theory, absolutely. And why do we buy into it? Because there's some examples of it? That's your
I think we buy into it because we want temporary relief. We just want relief from like all the mud and stuff we're dragging ourselves through. And so we think maybe if we entertain the illusion for a little while, we'll be able to breathe.
Yeah, but where does the evidence? Where does the evidence take us? What do your eyes tell us? But we know humanity in some regards. We have to believe, and I think that's the point that you're making. That people have to believe. Otherwise, the motivation disappears. The other side of this is, let me put it this way. These are decision makers who know that there has to be some degree of fluidity in the system. So what I mean by that is a tier of the population is going to be able to live and support family and to make a way out of no way. So you have those examples that, yes, the system still works. Look at those examples. But what it erases is the point that you were making, Tennille, about believing something that doesn't have substance in a fundamental way. I think the other point I want to make about this is, I know a lot of our everyday is about the communities that we're a part of and the people that we touch and feel and live with and organize with. But don't forget that this system is global and that across the world, there are people who are living on or attempting to live on $1 a day or less. We always need to keep in mind in terms of building solidarity, what happens here, but the consequences of a lot of the decision making that happens here has formidable outcomes, deadly outcomes for people across the world. I know some of you might know, speaking of the extractivism, how much the Ogoni people in Nigeria fought against Shell Oil Company. Shell has poisoned the grounds. Oil is coming out everywhere. Now, this raises the question of a political leadership there who are African, who have opened up the gates to Shell and to these other companies that are devastating. So what's in their interest? They get a piece of the pie, if you will. So in relationship with these global companies, there are aiders and abettors within these societies. It wouldn't be possible without it. And the other piece of it, of course, is war, militarism. And the US has 800 million military bases across the world. We started someone earlier with this whole issue of Ukraine. And I think that is a very, very powerful example of what is this war really about. And I think whoever made that analysis made it very clear that it isn't what we've been told it is about access to those resources. As I don't remember the person who shared that example, but it's a global question as well as a question here in the United States. Let me see if there's anything. Yeah, a mass hysteria. Good, Mo. Good, Mo. All right, we're coming up on lunchtime. I know y'all are probably anxious to take a break. Any other comments or observations before we break for a half an hour and then return? Let me see what else is in the. Charlie stated that. Charlie, can you take us out on the Ukraine? Remind people once again about the real basis of what's going on in Ukraine right now.
So what Russia and China are realizing is that the United States is losing its foothold as a world power because our money is no longer based on anything real or tangible.
But it's still the dollar is still we still use the dollar as they're trying to get rid of the dollar. Is that what you're saying?
Right. And so, yeah, the reserve currency it used to be based on gold, but we're so far in debt to China, in debt to a lot of different places. And so China's doing a different kind of land grab without starting wars, where they're buying up property and land across Africa and across the world. And then Russia is like, well, we need to get some land that has profit in it. And so that's why they're going after Ukraine, to try to do that, because they're getting ready for a shift to happen and for the United States to kind of fall apart, because the way that they've been invested in dividing us even further so that we can't come together and work together as a community and to uproot and bring to light that deep-rooted racism. Not uprooted, but they're not trying to do that, but like and then I was also thinking about how you were talking about like how they give us examples of like, well, they did it so you can do it too, and then like tokenism, and then they turn around and they're like, oh, you want to be like me, buy my product, this is how you can be like me, be like
me. Right. Well, on that note, we'll close out, and I'll see y'all at 12:30. I think we stay in this room, don't we, Nkuli?
Yeah, we can stay in here, or if folks want to hop off and then come back, that's fine too. But this is
okay. I think I will just get off camera and not go off.
Okay, cool.
All right. See you in a little.
We'll be back at 12:30.
Is everyone back or people still arriving?
If folks are back, may please give a thumbs up. Cool, thank you.
So we're ready to go?
I think so. I'm seeing some yes in the chat, thumbs up.
All right, let's do it. Okay, several things to think about, and I want to open up this section with a bit more concreteness about capitalism today. I think we've touched upon some of the key issues, but again, that good question about how we got here, and one of the major pieces of how we got here deals with the racial wealth divide in this country. If we take seriously our definition of racial capitalism, this divide will not be resolved under capitalism. But in the interim, in the transition to something else, it is important to think about who has access to wealth, who doesn't, why does that happen, and what can be done about it. Some of you may be familiar with the series Race, the Power and Illusion. There's a clip on the house we live in, which looks at how the US government played a role. So it's not simply capitalism, as I've said, that the government and capitalism are deeply intertwined. And I wonder if sometimes people don't make that connection or don't know that. But this clip, it's a short one, gets us into that connection. We can take some time to talk about it because it's the underpinning for some of the wealth divide today. Of course, it's intensified since this particular film was made, and we can talk more about that. So let me do a screen share and share this short video. Okay. Oops, not that one. This is the long one. I wanted the short one. Anyway, let me see what I can do. Guess I'll just have to skip into it. Let's see. Oh.
Major funding for this program provided by the Ford Foundation, a resource for innovative people and institutions worldwide.
Is that good? Can you hear me?
And the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. Additional funding provided by these funders. It is all around us. It is an illusion and yet profoundly real. What we perceive as race is one of the first things we notice about each other. Skin, darker or lighter. Eyes, round or almond, blue, black, brown. Hair, curly, straight, blonde, or dark. And attached to these characteristics is a mosaic of values, assumptions, and historical meanings. Even those of us who claim we don't believe the stereotypes can easily recite them.
The average person on the street thinks that race consists of differences in physical appearance. They also think that from looking at a person's physical appearance, that they can find out or know more subtle things about them. Race is not a level of biological division that we find in anatomically modern humans. There are no subspecies in the human beings that live today.
And that's quite shocking to a lot of individuals. When you look and you think you see race, to be told that no, you don't see race, you just think you see race. That, yeah, it's based on your cultural lens. That's extremely challenging.
Just because race isn't a biological reality doesn't mean it isn't real. Being classified as Asian or Black or Latino has never carried the same advantages in our society as being white.
Race in itself means nothing. The markers of race, skin color, hair texture, the things that we identify as the racial markers mean nothing unless they are given social meaning and unless there's public policy and private actions that act upon those kinds of characteristics. That creates race.
Physical differences don't make race. What makes race are the laws and practices that affect life chances and opportunities based on those differences. If we look carefully, we can see how our institutions and policies have assigned racial identities and reinforced racial inequality throughout the 20th century.
And this is something I think that all immigrant groups experience in one way or another when they come to America, no matter what point in time it is, because they come to a country that has historically always been highly racialized. It's a country where race has its origins in slavery, as well as in the conquest of Native American Indians. So anybody coming from the outside after that point has to fit into this racialized society in some way. And it's not always clear how people are going to fit in right away.
I'm going to advance it. Let's see.
My
The
were undesirable. That
said it was ancestral
person, because they were presented with so-called scientific evidence that Indians were Caucasian. And the court solved this problem by saying that it didn't matter what science said, so-called science. They actually said white is not something that can be scientifically determined, but white is something that is subjectively understood by who they called the common person, the common man.
It may be true, reasoned the court, that the blonde Scandinavian and the brown Hindu have a common ancestor in the dim reaches of antiquity. But the average man knows perfectly well that there are unmistakable and profound differences between them today. The same court that used science to determine whiteness in Ozawa 3 months before now refuted its own reasoning in Thind. Thind might well be Caucasian, the High Court said, but he was not white. The justices never said what whiteness was, only what it wasn't. Their implied logic was a circular one. Whiteness was what the common white man said it was.
The court often decided who was white and who wasn't based on whether they just felt that the person would politically fit well into the kind of society that we were trying to build. And sometimes it was pretty explicit that this is what the court was doing.
There was widespread racial views that Asians were undesirable, that they threatened to contaminate the American society. Basically, that Asians are too different, that they can't ever really become like the rest of us.
Okay, advancing it further.
Oscar. It was a time when hundreds of thousands of GIs came home ready to start families, but had no place to live.
Living space was at a premium. In the Bronx, they tried building Quonset huts, and they turned to slums. All the Quonset huts had just disintegrated. There were two families sharing a hut. One family at one end, one family at the other, and before you know it, they were awful.
FHA came to the rescue by ensuring long-term, low monthly payment mortgage loans.
Veterans needed homes for families. They turned to a revolutionary New Deal housing program. It would racialize housing, wealth, and opportunity for decades in ways few could have imagined.
In the 1930s, the federal government created the Federal Housing Administration, whose job it was to provide loans, or the backing for loans, to average Americans so they could purchase a home.
Due to the stimulation of the National Housing Act, from every section of the country come reports of vastly...
In order to purchase a house in America prior to the 1930s, you had to pay 50% of the sales price up front. The new terms of purchasing a home was that you put 10% or 20% down, and the bank financed 80% of it, not over 5 years, but over 30 years at relatively low rates. This opened up the opportunities for Americans to own homes like ever before. The average person could own that home.
If these terms sound familiar, they should, because this is essentially the same financing scheme that allows most Americans to own their homes today. Federal programs and banks sank millions into the home construction industry. Their message to veterans: you can afford a new home. Buy a new home now. On the outskirts of Baltimore, Memphis, Chicago, Los Angeles, Denver, and other cities, brand new communities sprang up. One of the most famous was a Long Island potato field, transformed into 17,000 new homes. It was called Levittown. Tax dollars helped make the single-family home a mass-produced consumer item. The American dream had a new name: suburbia.
You have to remember the people who came here in 1947, 1948 were young ex-GIs whose uppermost concern was taking advantage of the GI Bill and making things better for themselves.
Before moving to Levittown, Herb Callisman and his wife Doris lived in a cramped attic apartment in New York City.
And when we began to look for an apartment, we found that the apartments were $100, $125, $150 a month. I know that's unbelievable today, but it was too expensive for us. And out here in Levittown, the mortgage payments was $65 a month.
Your kitchen dazzles every eye. A brand
Walked in. The Bendix would be part of the real estate.
We came to Levittown and we found the model house, and we walked in and we looked around, and course, in the eyes of a young man who was raised in the ghetto, so to speak, it was an interesting experience, interesting lifestyle, seeing all the new modern conveniences. Very fascinating.
Eugene Burnett came home with almost 1 million other black GIs. They had fought for the country in segregated ranks. They returned hoping for equality and the American dream. For many, that dream was a new home for little money down and some of the easiest credit terms in history.
I went up to the salesman. We're interested in your home. We're interested in buying one. And what is the procedure? Is there an application to be filled out? So forth. So he looked at me, looked around, and he said to me, he says, listen, it's not me, but the owners of this development have not as yet decided to sell these homes to Negroes.
It was as though it wasn't real. You can't imagine. But for someone to come out and actually tell you that they can't sell to you, you know, I was really on an up. Man, look at this house. Can you imagine having this? And then for them to tell me because of the color of my skin, I can't be a part of it.
The FHA underwriters warned that the presence of even 1 or 2 non-white families could undermine real estate values in the new suburbs. These government guidelines were widely adopted by private industry. Race had long played a role in local real estate practices. Starting in the 1930s, government officials institutionalized a national appraisal system where race was as much a factor in real estate assessment as the condition of the property. Using this scheme, federal investigators evaluated 239 cities across the country for financial risk.
So that those communities that were all white, suburban, and far away from minority areas, they received the highest rating, and that was the color green. Those communities that were all minority or in the process of changing, they got the lowest rating, and the color red. They were redlined. As a consequence, most of the mortgages went to suburbanizing America, and it suburbanized it racially.
The racial logic adopts the principle that an integrated neighborhood is a bad risk, is a financial risk, that an integrated neighborhood is likely to be an unstable neighborhood, unstable socially, but therefore also unstable economically.
Okay, just a couple of other things from, oh, right there.
As in the past, whites had meant being a citizen and being a Christian. It now meant living in the suburbs.
Only 50 years before, European ethnics were believed to be distinct races. Now, in these new segregated neighborhoods, they blended together as white Americans.
We just okay.
Whiter, not
almost there. Let's see.
So, and making it difficult to get those places. Of the people are not looking in those places for home.
Calculation and leave first. So you get a vicious circle where whites calculate that other whites are going to sell when a neighborhood integrates. Therefore, they want to sell first to avoid losses, and they actually make it happen. They make white flight happen.
And if you think about African Americans, if African Americans are 20% of that market, it means that 80% of the people are not looking in those places for homes. So the prices of those homes declines or stays stable. And banks contribute to this by continually making loans in regions that are on the rise, white communities, and making it difficult to get loans in black communities.
So there's a difference. There's a lack of symmetry that's important to keep in mind. So it's not the same when whites are all by themselves, because when they're all by themselves, they're taking all the resources with them. They're taking all the amenities with them. But when blacks are by themselves, they can't get loans. They don't have a decent tax base. There are no jobs, and then that becomes associated with black space.
In the end, what happened to Roosevelt happens in many neighborhoods when white families and businesses flee.
Okay, let's see.
Of Jim Crow law. At one point, we had explicit laws that says whites are on top and blacks are on the bottom. Today, we have many of the same practices without the explicit language. And those practices are largely inscribed in geography. And so geography does the work of Jim Crow laws. So many people are confused as why after 50 years of civil rights are our schools still segregated? Why are our housing markets still segregated? Why are our jobs still segregated? And again, a lot of this is a function of how we've reinscribed the racial geographic space in the United States. That structure is still what we're living with today.
As homes in white communities appreciated in value, the net worth of these white families grew. For most non-white families who stayed in urban neighborhoods, the housing market open to them in the 50s and 60s was largely a rental market. You don't gain equity by paying rent.
Where one's family lives in America is not just a matter of taste and preference. You have the issue of housing and...
Let's see. Right, this is...
it's...
Okay.
That's how they... it's their bank, right? In America is not just a matter of taste and preference. You have the issue of housing and wealth. The majority of Americans hold most of their wealth in the form of home equity. So that's their nest egg. That's how they can finance the education of their offspring. That's how they can sort of save up for retirement. It's their savings bank, right? They're living in their savings bank.
My family, like a lot of families, was in Detroit struggling to buy a house. You had a dual housing market, one white, one black. A housing market with one with a lot of demand, another housing market with very little demand. My father lives in the house that I grew up in. That house today, 5-bedroom house, is worth about $20,000. That same house bought in the suburbs would be worth today about $320,000. So whites moving to the suburb were being subsidized in the accumulation of wealth, while blacks were being divested.
And these were public policy decisions in which, on one hand, people were given access to property, given title, and subsequently wealth, and on another hand, where people were not given access to property, did not generate wealth, and did not generate the kind of opportunity for the next generation.
So if you can get a government loan and with your GI Bill, your newly earned college degree, and buy a house in an all-white area that then appreciates in value, that then you can pass on to your children, then you're passing on wealth that has all been made more available to you as a consequence of racist policies and practices. To this child.
Okay, I'm sure you got the gist of it. That was actually the full video, and the shorter piece of it, somehow it disappeared on me. But let's take a moment to take that apart, see the implications for today. Obviously, a couple of things have changed. The logic of wealth in this country has not. It's become much more concentrated. I think that's what we've said, especially in the period after 2008, and especially during the pandemic. The super rich have even gotten richer. And during the 2008 the period of 2008 when banks were offering high interest loans and actually taking houses away from Black and brown communities. The loss of wealth during that period was tremendous. And a couple other points that were lifted up that probably resonate with you. The fact that into the 21st century, it's still very difficult to get banks to provide other than extravagant interest rates loan, even if the credit score is the same, the educational level, the occupational level. So that tells you how wealth expropriation seeps into every aspect of this whole idea that housing becomes a way to build wealth. And it certainly has not been that way for too many Black and brown communities. There have been more than one study done here in the Twin Cities. We know that banks like Wells Fargo and others have been terrible culprits in terms of this whole issue of redlining and building wealth. I know they have backed away from that, and they are providing resources that should have been available to begin with, but a lot of the harm has been done. And another piece, given the time that this particular video was done, and they didn't talk about this whole process of gentrification, where buyers are swooping in to communities. That certainly happened on the north side and parts of the south side, and buying up homes and pushing people out. And that's happening all over this country. So it's been deepened in terms of what does it really mean to have the capacity to build wealth. And remember, wealth is what you own, those things that are transferable into resources that can be used to live, minus what you owe or your debt. And some of the recent data indicate that whites have about 20 times the wealth holdings as African Americans and Latinos. So, I began with the point that it's under capitalist dynamics that these kinds of public policies are carried out. It's also under racism and racial dynamics that these kinds of policies are carried out, back to our point around racial capitalism. So I wanted to put that on the agenda, see what people thought about the video, any reactions and responses to that, and let me hear from folk. I see there's some things in the chat. What comes to mind after seeing the video and the whole relationship between housing and wealth? Anybody? I see Mujahid says a vicious cycle. Now these say folk come back and gentrify. Well, saying the same thing that I just said. You want to say more about that? About the gentrification process, because they didn't really talk about that at this point in time, but it's certainly intensified.
No, I think what you said says it all.
Okay. All right, good. Anybody else in terms of what you're seeing on a day-to-day basis, the increasing difficulty to building wealth through housing? You can't build equity if you don't own. A disproportionate number of Black and brown communities in the Twin Cities are renters. The last data I saw, this was right around the time that the George Floyd uprising occurred, was Black home ownership was about 29%. I don't know if anyone has another figure. And white ownership in Minneapolis and the Twin Cities in general is some of the highest in the nation, as is the median income, which is at about $80,000 at this point, whereas Black median income, the last statistic I saw, was about $30,000 to $34,000. I mean, these are tremendous gaps. And you live in a we live in an area that talks about the liberalness of it, but when it comes down to the hardcore facts, financial institutions, capitalist institutions like banks play into this. We know we had public policy in the cities that had restricted covenants. Those have more recently been lifted, and now the gentrification piece. So other thoughts or comments?
I wanted to jump in and, oh, go ahead, Kenna.
What comes to mind for me as someone who is, I mean, I'm like, I'm not valuing like ownership and being a great capitalist as like the signs that I have made it, even though like I do own my home, and I recognize like in trying to live communally and collaboratively with my neighbors and having a mix of people, like I'm trying to show how do I value that having like different types of dwellings and affordable housing, and yes, people that are renting and people that are in like alternative dwelling units and collaboratively owned land stewardship, like all different ways of again being a steward of the place, not just acting like because I own it, that's like meaning like that's the highest place in the hierarchy, like trying to flatten out the way that I view my neighbors.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, and it shifts the frame. I mean, think about how we define capitalism, and definitely home ownership is not something to be criticized in the absolute sense of it, but back to your point, it's the logic that underpins it that we might want to call into question. If the emphasis is on building wealth for individual consumption, we might want to think about another logic, which thinks communally, collectively, and I know that's the work that you all are doing, but that's a new frame. I mean, that's something that hasn't been a part of the calculus for thinking about how do we build a different kind of social order where many people are supported and lifted up. And the resistance to that, of course, banks make money out of those 30-year loans, to put it mildly. You paid for your home 2 or 3 times, even at very low interest rates. And those rates have gone up rather dramatically over the past period, given, quote, inflation. And, we have to ask the question, who is the culprit behind inflation? You would never get that from the media, that who is really benefiting from these rising costs. But anyway, there are other people who have something to say. Charlie, you wanted to add something to this piece of our discussion?
I think Lane had their hand up first.
Oh, sorry. Go right ahead. Lane, go right ahead.
Thank you, Charles. All of the history in the video really had me thinking about how like racialized capitalism has literally impacted the architecture in Minneapolis. If you look at the placement of 35W and 94 and where those highways went through, they went through predominantly Black owned neighborhoods, and we saw like an extreme loss of Black wealth for the benefit of, well, we know.
Yeah, we know. Excellent point. Excellent point. Who was next? I sort of lost the stack.
Oh, Charlie Mujahid.
All right.
I was just gonna say that I know you just touched on inflation a little bit, but it's like now that there are more resources available, like to everybody, it's still that unattainable goal in some ways because the prices have been so inflated. And even just like building materials and all of that stuff, like we've just totally decimated our forests, and there's a limited supply of everything. And so even though now we can tap into these things like FHA loans and first-time home buyers stuff, like the inequity in the incomes, and then on top of that with inflation, it keeps moving the goalpost.
Yeah, and as important is at the policy level, they're not building affordable housing, which accords with your statement. It's been many, many decades since there have been resources put into this kind of housing, and that has everything to do with the lobby that has pushed against the building of that. And the consequences we can see right before our eyes here in the Twin Cities, tent cities, and compared to places like Los Angeles and some other cities, it's a abomination that in this very rich country you have people living under bridges because of policy and because of capitalist greed. And that's basically what it boils down to in terms of, what are we going to do about it and how we're going to do it. Charlie, you had a comment.
Oh, no, I just made my comment, but yeah, they're not building the affordable housing, and the stuff that is labeled affordable housing is not always safe. It's not always accessible. There's like millions of hoops you have to jump through to like prove that you don't make enough and that you make enough. And then, yeah, so I'll pass the torch to Mujib.
What was I next?
Yeah, you're next,
Okay.
and you probably got passed over because I have lost that
No worries.
Okay.
One of the things that was coming up for me watching that is this like how the story is being framed about white being advantaged and color being disadvantaged. And I get like what's being communicated, but I'm also just questioning that narrative entirely, where perhaps it's the reverse. Is it really an advantage for white people to be the kings of oppression, right? To like be holding the keys to all of these resources and power, and to use it manipulatively and oppressively and in ways that harm people and planet. Like, is that really an advantage? So that's like what I'm toying with in my mind. Not toying, but what, like, just kind of what I'm processing in my mind, listening to all of that.
Well, no, you're asking the deeper philosophical issue. And of course, that has come up for as long as racism has existed. How much harm those who supposedly are advantaged actually inflict on self in terms of living a life where one's own humanity is so compromised that you can't see the humanity in others. What does that mean to live as a human being in that way, not fully developed in that way? And the advantage piece in this in the film was pretty narrow, in that if it makes sense and it's important for people to have shelter, it really is horrific if because of the color of one's skin you can't have access to that. But that's a very, very materially based, crucial point to be made. But I hear you saying that there are also deeper philosophical questions that many human beings have asked. We're all inextricably linked to one another, as Dr. King would have said. So in that sense, but in terms of people being able to live and not die, then you have to take on the injustices and inequities that are so racialized in this society and undermine them, undercut them, dismantle them. How many people have been lost because of this? So it can't be propagated. But I do hear, you're questioning a somewhat particular kind of frame. All right. Few other things in the chat. Tennille, did you just want to say it, or you want me to read it?
No, it's fine if you read it. And just FYI, Cooley has her hand raised too.
Okay. To Neil's point, I would only add that in gentrifying neighborhoods, I've been seeing that some cities have decided to make environmental and structural improvements when non-Black residents are present that they wouldn't have made for the Black residents that have been present for generations. You know, I know in my work on really trying to think about improvements like bicycle lanes, if you consider that an improvement, the green space, etc. And I know a lot of the community are very cynical about that, because they make the point that you are making, that once those things happen, that just becomes a magnet for other people to move in, and the community that has been so much a part of that not benefiting from it. So that's certainly part of the suspicion, and not without evidence, actually. You know, I know I just, my heart sinks every time I'm in Washington, DC. I can remember, you know, the old Washington, DC. Some of y'all might know that, that area around Howard University, and how much that has been gentrified. You can't even afford those, typically it's, you know, condos and multi-family housing, you know, at $1 million+ And you just discernibly see, and the people in Southeast Washington, Black folk in particular, have been pushed out. It's interesting that in the film, it was about suburbanization white. Now, in many of these communities, Chicago being one, DC being another, historical Black communities are being pushed into the hinterlands with little transportation into the areas that had historically been part of that community. So, you know, all of these things are going on simultaneously as we're trying to figure out what's to be done. Who else was on the stack, please?
Yeah, I just wanted to, I think something that stood out was like racial covenants. Like I live in Prospect Park, so like that history of racial covenants like stood out, and like the housing disparity, especially like in Minnesota. But one thing that I was thinking about too is in terms, you mentioned something about credit with housing
access to credit, getting credit.
Yeah, access to getting credit, and you know, as you know, credit goes for buying homes and so forth, like as it goes for like housing cooperatives and land trusts. Okay, the first point, housing cooperatives and land trusts, oftentimes cooperatives in general, we see that they are able to live through recessions because multiple people own the business, the house, whatever together, they're able to absorb the losses together. So it takes a little bit longer to like have the business or the housing cooperative close. So like that's one of the things that we've seen. So that's also true with like housing. That's something. And also with credit, you know, like if I buy a house right now, they'll just be looking at my credit score. But if I'm buying a housing cooperative with multiple people, a cooperative lender will be looking at like the credit score will be shared amongst multiple people. And so like I'm just like looking at the benefits of like doing this work, and like why it's beneficial when we think about like sharing ownership. Like it's also sharing in the things that are also like murky and hard and weird. Yeah, and so those are some of the things that I was thinking about as we were watching this, and as folks were talking too.
Yeah, no, good contributions. I know, and you probably know this as well as anyone, that here in Minneapolis, the idea of building multi occupant housing had been on the agenda. Where does that stand now? Because a lot of these neighborhoods were very resistant to that. They're single household dwellings, and push back. Do you know?
I don't know where that stands right now. I think I was more so following on like TOPA, or the Right to Purchase Act.
Okay.
So that's what I was following, and I know that's still like on pause right now. But that's what I was following more so.
Yeah, and do you know why that's on pause? Because the Democrats can't get anything through?
Well, you said it, so we'll leave it at that.
We don't even get into that. And you talked about, this is another good resource, A Race for Profit. We could put that on the resource list. That is a book that y'all might want to read in common, by Kianga Yamada Taylor.
Yeah, I mean that book, I actually had to pull it out because I had to remember. I mean, that history just like of yeah, like how black homeownership was undermined in so many ways with like FHA, with like how they would sell these basically like falling apart houses to black folks, and then they wouldn't be able to afford them. How FHA would like seemingly be affordable or accessible and then be inaccessible. Even thinking about GI Bills and like who they were actually for, like black veterans weren't really included in GI Bills. So like in homeownership or even like scholarships for education and all of these things. So this is like a really great resource too.
Yeah.
But I think Dr. Brewer's book, which I don't know, somewhere here. Oh yeah, The Color of Wealth is also a
yeah,
great
that's another good resource.
The Color of Wealth is also a great resource, and I'm happy to share these with folks too. So yeah.
Yeah, around the GI Bill, as they were talking about it, remember, this is a time when you really couldn't get admitted to most of these institutions. So even if you had a GI Bill for education that allowed you to get a degree, you weren't going to be able to be admitted because of the racial exclusionary policies of higher education. You know, the University of Minnesota, for example, didn't say explicitly that you would be excluded, but you know, as late as even 1969, they only had 80 Black students on campus. So there's no way. Most of the GIs back in the 40s had to try to turn to historically Black institutions to be able to use their GI benefits. And those all were pretty small. They could only accommodate just a few people. And, you know, as we were saying earlier, everything is racialized in this society in a way that tremendously disadvantaged. Even if the policy says it's for everyone, typically it isn't for everyone. So I know that point is clear for folk. I don't know if anyone else had observations or points, and then we're going to move into a last little bit of hands-on work. I've heard a number of excellent examples about the way forward, from obviously cooperative housing, land trust. We want to dig a little bit more deeply into, well, if not this system, what system? How might we think about that? In my own organizing work, we've been, you know, very clear that, you know, you're not going to snap your fingers and this system implodes, despite the fact that China and Russia and other parts of the world are breathing down the US's throat. I would say it's a system under threat. How quickly it can be superseded, who knows? You know, the next few years or 100 years, we simply don't know that. And you know, the effort it's going to take in transition, I think, is as much a part of what we should have our eye on as to, you know, imagine a completely different system, and especially trying to build features of that, even as we're attempting to dismantle the deeply rooted inequalities of the current space. But certainly no kind of long-term capitalism, given its logic, and if for no other reason than it's a growth philosophy, and we live on a finite earth. So a growth philosophy, which has worked hasn't really worked that well, but let's say the 400 or 500 years where every part of the earth has had the stamp of this kind of system on it. We're not in that place anymore. And, some people are saying you can build a different kind of capitalism. I haven't seen that, but it's certainly been put on the agenda, a gentler, kinder one. But if it means that profits are lessened, I don't see how that would be embraced. But that's just where my head is around this. But anyway, we're going to shift to going to do small group again, and this time it's a 3-part kind of exercise that y'all are discussing. We've just seen, and we know some of the comments that have been made, that policy is deeply intertwined with the racial capitalist system. But thinking about some of the alternatives that y'all put on the table, what differences can be made through the cooperative economy, the work of Black cooperatives, so that would be one group. And then the solidarity economy takes a different point of departure from a capitalist economy. Everything we do actually contributes to what we call economy under the solidarity economy. One of the things that capitalism does that doesn't get monetized, but is as much a part of the profit that is received, is the unpaid labor that's disproportionately done by women, femmes, and gender non-conforming folk. Without that kind of care work, a whole piece of the profit system, the worker has to eat, the worker has to be taken care of, and so they just take that for granted, that we don't pay for that, but that's a part of the logic of how profit is derived. A different kind of system, it's not so much monetary that's recognized, but it's a recognition that not one singular group has to be responsible for doing the work that cares for all of us, that should be something that's shared, not according to gender, but according to we all have to live. So thinking about that, what a solidarity economy as another possibility might look like. And then the whole idea of eco-socialism or socialism. Any socialism that replaces capitalism is going to have to be rooted in an eco frame, eco-ecology frame. The old socialism, the idea that we just split up the resources, but there was a bit of a growth dynamic underneath that. There wasn't much of an environmental justice component to it. So even if we take profit out of the hands of a tiny group of owners, we would still have to imagine a kind of alternative where resources are shared, and the consequences for the earth, for sentient beings, for others, which makes the trees and the other living entities a part of this equation. That's something that is just beginning to be thought about and thought through. So the third group would be thinking about, yes, socialism might be the way, but what else would have to happen in addition to just splitting up the resources among the majority of human beings, and not simply a tiny elite. So I'm going to just split you all up according to those categories. And we'll say group 1 is going to be cooperative economy and Black cooperatives, and y'all chart that vision. Group 2 is the solidarity economy, and group 3 involves the just transition to socialism. So let me get that up and going. Any questions about that? Okay, so we'll take the next maybe 15 to 20 minutes and come back with one recommendation. Have a spokesperson who comes back with one recommendation about why your particular approach to change is an important one as we try to move this process forward. So let me do the breakout rooms. And let's see. All right. Okay, I think we're ready to go. So group one has Lane and Mujid and Sophia and Tanil, and y'all are doing the piece on cooperative economy, Black cooperatives. Group two has Charlie, I believe that's Dotfro, I'm not sure about the pronunciation, Liana and Mo. And then Just Transition and Socialism has Cal, Jahan, Kenna, and Sarita. So I'm going to open the rooms for y'all. Did you want to join a room? You want to stay here?
I can join a room.
Okay, well, I'll put you in. No, they're all pretty equally divided. Let's see. Why don't you just join whichever you want?
Okay.
And Kenna, how come you didn't end up in room 3?
She might. Oh, there she goes.
Oh, okay.
All right, I'll join group 1.
All right, sounds good. I think everybody is back, and I can only imagine this being the beginning of a conversation. I'm hopeful that this will continue. I know y'all have a full schedule of work to be done. But yeah, these are tough questions. Let's see if we can get some action steps given the grounding. We had a pretty consistent grounding in racial capitalism.
Yep, I'm in a class, but you can come in. You need help?
That's okay. That's okay. So anyway, I was saying, let's see what kind of action steps, given our grounding in racial capitalism and so many important issues that y'all put on the table, and we'll just start with group one. This whole issue of the cooperative economy, Black cooperatives, certainly thread through a number of the comments, glimpses into what that means. And in that group, I don't know if y'all select the spokesperson, but whomever wants to share, please do.
I can make an attempt. Hi, Jai here. So we talked about learning about history through this fellowship / education as an action step. We discussed a little bit about instead of individualistic independence, it's understanding that community provides like a mutual interdependence lens. There was also talk about amplification of movement work towards interdependence. Cooperatives define people as a solution instead of the product. And then we talked a little bit about how those cooperatives also cooperate with other cooperatives and how it becomes this big wide cast net of resources. And also incorporating rest as a means of community care without shame also gives us space to imagine possible futures.
Yeah. Just to push you a little bit on how you make the organizing work that you put on the table, the amplification of that movement work. I think that is desperately needed. So I'll come up with any ideas on how it can be amplified in the midst of the multiple crises and challenges that we're facing. Or maybe you didn't get that far.
No.
No, I didn't get that far.
But
yeah.
Any just off the top of your head ideas? Because what I've seen is we have a lot of internal work to do with our organizations. And as we're strengthening them and as we're amplifying their work, it's a matter of being in a position to really build with our community. If we're weak internally in terms of the people who have said, this is my life's work, this is how I'm going to move with my community, and I think rest is a piece of it, but what else do we need to do for amplification? Just food for thought. It was just one of the things that stuck out for me, and hopefully y'all can think through that further. So, yeah, principle 6, cooperation amongst cooperatives. Group 2, solidarity economy. Y'all have a spokesperson?
I guess I'll be the spokesperson again. But what we were talking about was what's needed and what's our recommendation also coincides and intersects with the issue at hand and the roadblocks we face is a reimagining of re-education, understanding, coming together and agreeing on, maybe, I don't know if agreeing on if we could ever reach an agreement, but reimagining education and reminding of the history, not just reframing, not just like the history, because I'm sorry, I think my brain is dying.
That's okay. We're getting your point. It's a particular kind of political education you're getting at, right?
Yeah, well, we were just talking about how like we don't even have that foundation of having a realistic understanding of the true history across our country, and how there needs to be a re-examination of like how we are educating all people from all generations, in through like an empowerment mindset, instead of like how our education system plays out as like learn how to follow the rules, learn how to sit in your chair, do what I tell you to, and don't do not dissent. Like
yeah,
where like I was talking about, like even though these systems that are I'm sorry, the alternative educations that are available today are not perfect, just kind of thinking about like the Montessori model, where like the child is a whole person and they are born a whole person, an infant is a whole person, and if you give them an environment that's accessible to them, then anything is possible. They can learn whatever they want to learn. They're self-directed and they learn at their own pace. And it's a beautiful thing to witness a child in an environment that is crafted for them. And so that was sort of what we were thinking in line with solidarity economy, because I think a lot of times people, they might understand the history, they might know what the true history is from different perspectives, and be able to understand that, but they don't necessarily integrate that into their own understanding of themselves and how they have been socialized or not, and how that can play out with harm. You guys are getting the gist of what I'm saying. I know it's not making
yeah, no, and you're saying it very well. Your generation is confronting something that is very, very challenging. It's always been a through line that has run through this country, just beneath the surface, the forces of reaction, and now they have reemerged, in full force. I don't think that's disconnected from some of the things that we're saying earlier about U.S. empire in decline, the fact that the COVID response was an abomination, and the pressure on profits in a world where growth is not possible in the old sense of the word. So having to confront that, and confront it in a way that you're talking about, really connects to me to group number one's notion of the amplification of that, thinking about how that can be amplified to reach a number of people. I know one of the challenges that we've had over the years, and I've lived in the Twin Cities for a long time, is how do you bring spaces like this into community settings? It's one thing to say that, but it's another. That to me, that's a piece of the amplification that needs to happen. But I again, some thought for how can we multiply this? I like amplification, just keeps running through. I love group one saying amplification. How do we amplify these important ways of being in the world, whether it be Montessori or the whole nine?
Yeah.
Anyway, yes, go right ahead.
Me?
Yes,
Okay.
go right ahead.
Peace and blessings, Dr. Rose.
It's been a long time since I've seen you.
It's so good to see you too.
Same
Thank you
here.
so much for being here with us today.
I've loved it. Y'all are so sharp. Anyway, go with what you're going to say.
You know me, I like amplification, right? I like to amplify things. And so you know the way that I'll add and say that things to be amplified is through being made into more music. And I remember a song about helping verbs from 4th grade, and I'll never forget that. You couldn't.
Do you want to share it with us?
You can't extract it from my muscle memory. Be, being, been, am, is, are, was, were, have, has, had, do, does, did, can, could, shall, should, will, would, may, might, must are helping verbs. Hey, helping verbs. So, you can do that with so much. There's so much that a lot of times I would be like, I need to remember this forever. I'm going to turn it into a song, and I don't think I have enough, enough songs about chemistry or, enough songs about, poli-sci or whatever, economics, different economics and things.
You need some songs about economics.
I would really, really love a lot more like Black history songs. I just heard a really awesome jam yesterday about Shirley Chisholm, and we were getting down, you know what I'm saying? But I will make up a song I don't hear too, so I
know y'all know this. I just can't even say enough about your creative ability to bring the politics of a moment to what our soul needs for that moment. And you know which song I'm thinking about, but I'm not going to ask you to sing it. There's a time when we won't have to march anymore. Have y'all heard that one? Okay, so you know what I'm saying. Anything else from what's to be done for the socialism group? Did y'all even touch upon that idea any further? Or y'all left that alone?
Well, I didn't quite catch the question, but I didn't mean to say Montessori is the only way, but I love that Jayanthi came on with the music, because music is the #1 learning tool.
That's
you
right.
can learn anything. If you sing to your child, they will be talking. This is a testimonial. They will be talking and walking and jiving before you would ever have expected them to, and all of a sudden they're powerful movements of change, agents of change. There we go.
Well, that's what
music education, nature education, just the way of being invited in to be, not to flow free. There we go.
Yeah, and again, not so accidental that art and music programs have been eliminated in a lot of these spaces, and thinking about the political legacy of struggle in this country wouldn't happen without music. So yeah. Well, anyway, this has really been enriching, and appreciate everything, all the offerings that people have had. One of my favorite offerings is from the fierce June Jordan. If you don't know Jordan's poetry, please get copies of her autobiography and the many poems that she wrote before transitioning. But this is one of my favorite ones because it's so intense. It's so, we can identify what the problem is, and even some of the issues, but it's going to take a kind of fierce commitment to make it manifest. And I think the poem about my rights definitely expresses that. So let me do one last share here. Okay. See. Well, why has it disappeared? It means I have too many things on my screen, which is quite true. Okay. Maybe I can bring it up again. Bear with me, y'all. I know we're at time, but I did want to close out with this. Let me see. Oh, rats. What are you? Let's see. Now, this is definitely not my strong suit in terms of manipulating Zoom. Okay.
How can I?
That's okay, doctor.
Dr.
We don't
Beth?
care.
Y'all are patient. I'm glad to hear that.
I think I found it. I don't know how I can help. How can I help?
Well, I think I found it. Hold up.
Okay.
Let's see if it will appear. I'm seeing it, but it's not showing up on my share. Nicole, do you think you could pull up Poem About My Rights?
Yeah, I was just about to ask.
Okay. Yeah, that's it.
Poem about my rights. Even tonight, and I need to take a walk and clear my head about this poem about why I can't go out without changing my clothes, my shoes, my body posture, my gender identity, my age, my status as a woman alone in the evening, alone on the streets, alone not being the point being that I can't do what I want to do with my own body, because I am the wrong sex, the wrong age, the wrong skin. And suppose it was not here in the city, but down on the beach, or far into the woods, and I wanted to go there by myself, thinking about God, or thinking about children, or thinking about the world, all of it disclosed by the stars and the silence. I could not go, and I could not think, and I could not stay there alone as I need to be alone, because I can't do what I want to do with my own body. And who in the hell set things up like this? And in France they say, if the guy penetrates but does not ejaculate, then he did not rape me. And if after stabbing him, if after screams, if after begging the bastard, and if even after smashing a hammer to his head, if even after that, if he and his buddies fuck me after that, then I consented and there was no rape, because finally you understand, finally they fucked me over because I was wrong. I was wrong again to be me being me where I was. Wrong to be who I am, which is exactly like South Africa penetrating into Namibia, penetrating into Angola. And does that mean, how do you know if Pretoria ejaculates? What will the evidence look like? The proof of the monster jackboot ejaculation on black land? And if after Namibia, and if after Angola, and if after Zimbabwe, and if after all of my kinsmen and women resist, even to self-immolation of the villages, and if after that we lose nevertheless, what will the big boys say? Will they claim my consent? Do you follow me? We are the wrong people of the wrong skin on the wrong continent, and what in the hell is everybody being reasonable about? And according to the Times this week, the CIA decided that they had this problem, and the problem was a man named Nkrumah, so they killed him. And before that, it was Patrice Lumumba. And before that, it was my father on the campus of my Ivy League school, and my father afraid to walk into the cafeteria because he said he was wrong. The wrong age, the wrong skin, the wrong gender identity, and he was paying my tuition. And before that, it was my father saying I was wrong, saying that I should have been a boy because he wanted one, a boy, and that I should have been lighter skinned, and that I should have had straighter hair, and that I should not be so boy crazy, but instead I should just be one, a boy. And before that, it was my mother pleading plastic surgery for my nose and braces for my teeth, and telling me to let the books loose, to let them loose. In other words, I am very familiar with the problems of the CIA, and the problems of South Africa, and the problems of Exxon Corporation, and the problems of white America in general, and the problems of the teachers and the preachers and the FBI and the social workers and my particular mom and dad. I am very familiar with the problems because the problems turn out to be me. I am the history of rape. I am the history of the rejection of who I am. I am the history of the terrorized incarceration of myself. I am the history of battery, assault, and limitless armies against whatever I want to do with my mind and my body and my soul. And whether it's about walking out at night, or whether it's about the love that I feel, or whether it's about the sanctity of my vagina, or the sanctity of my national boundaries, or the sanctity of my leaders, or the sanctity of each and every desire that I know from my personal and idiosyncratic and indisputably single and singular heart, I have been raped because I have been wrong. The wrong sex, the wrong age, the wrong skin, the wrong nose, the wrong hair, the wrong need, the wrong dream, the wrong geographic, the wrong sartorial. I have been the meaning of rape. I have been the problem everyone seeks to eliminate by forced penetration with or without the evidence of slime. But let this be unmistakable. This poem is not consent. I do not consent to my mother, to my father, to the teachers, to the FBI, to South Africa, to Bedford-Stuy, to Park Avenue, to American Airlines, to the hard-on idlers on the corners, to the sneaky creeps in cars. I am not wrong. Wrong is not my name. My name is my own, my own, my own. And I can't tell you who the hell set things up like this, but I can tell you that from now on, my resistance, my simple and daily and nightly self-determination may very well cost you your life.
All right, y'all. Thank you so much for today, and hope to see you all again. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Dr. Brewer.
Thank
Good
you.
evening. Bye-bye.
Yes, thank you so much. And thank you all for joining us and staying over the time. Appreciate it. Appreciate everything. I hope you all take care. We have a Black Study session next Wednesday, thinking about Kwanzaa and all of this work and how it's related. So we will see you on Wednesday, but please take care and thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. The survey for the sessions in the chat. We'll send it out as well. I know we're over, so bye everyone. Take care.